Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is one of my favorite comic book video game adaptations of recent memory, but as of late it seems to be almost forgotten about. I hardly hear anybody talking about this movie anymore, despite the legendary director at its helm in Edgar Wright and the all-star cast at its core. So why is this? Why has it been completely forgotten about, or not talked about at all, or hardly ever? Well, I think one reason is because upon its initial release, it was met with sort of divisive reviews from both fans and critics alike. Some people saying that it was an incredible work of art and that it was an amazing, exhilarating, entertaining experience, but many others say that it's style over substance and that it's sort of hollow and shallow and undeserving of any kind of good review. So most people feel like this movie's sort of middle of the road. Another reason I think that this movie hasn't been talked about as much as I think it should be is because it was a gigantic financial flop for Universal Pictures. Even now, some 8 years later, the film hasn't even broken even. This movie's production budget was $60 million, and it barely made $40 million worldwide. So this was a big flop, even after the DVD release run of this movie. Just a big flop. I think the third and final factor why this movie's been sort of forgotten about is because if you look at Edgar Wright's filmography, this isn't exactly his best work. It may be his worst movie, actually. But saying that this isn't his best work is like saying silver is much, much worse than gold. And that's just not true. Silver is still really good compared to gold, but it's just not gold. So the people that win a silver medal are forgotten about because they didn't win a gold medal. And that's sort of where I feel like Scott Pilgrim falls in the Edgar Wright filmography. It's a really great movie, but it's just not that great. So people have forgotten about it when they can watch The Shaun of the Dead, or Hot Fuzz, or World's End, or Spaced, or Baby Driver. Scott Pilgrim seems to fall through the cracks between these other excellent movies. Needless to say, I love this movie, but why review it now? The movie's creeping up on being a decade old in just a few years, so it's well past its glory days. So why review it now? Well, I recently rewatched this movie with a couple of my friends, and it was like a breath of fresh air in this comic book genre, where so many movies are these factory-produced, middle-of-the-road, standard, very similar movies. This is so unique and so special that I felt like I had to talk about it.
Not so long ago, in the mysterious land of Toronto, Canada, Scott Pilgrim was dating a high schooler.
Scott Pilgrim is dating a high schooler?
Really? Is she hot?
How old are you now, Scott? Like 28?
I'm not playing your little games, kids.
So you've been out of high school for like 13 years.
I'm 22. 22.
What I really love about Edgar Wright's films is that he breaks all the rules of filmmaking. Normally, in these kind of action movies, you don't start with just a mundane conversation. A lot of these action movies start with an unrelated action sequence that sort of hooks you as an audience member, that gets you invested in what's happening. And this movie doesn't have that. It just starts with a boring conversation between some friends about how Scott's dating a 17-year-old high schooler. Like, this is completely breaks the mold of action filmmaking. And that's what I love about this movie and all of Edgar Wright's movies, is that he consciously knows what should a movie be, and then he just doesn't do that. Or he does it in a better way, or he subverts your expectations in that way. And that's what Scott Pilgrim does so exceedingly well for the entire runtime.
That's for me.
Hi.
You promise to be good?
Of course I'll be good.
Seriously, please be good.
Am I normally not?
Hey, Knives, this is Steven Stills. He's the talent.
Hey.
So we quickly established the majority of the main characters in just a few minutes here, and one thing that you'll notice right off the bat with this movie is that the characters aren't exactly that interesting. They're sort of these bad, boring, cliched stock characters, and they're not like the incredible full-bodied characters of 3 Billboards, but here, the only character we really get to know is Scott. Everyone else is sort of just there. A lot of times you kind of get their very basics of their personality. Like one character will just be the comedy relief, one character's the dumb character, one character's the head over heels in love character, one character's like a psychopath, one character is the town gossiper. Like these are just kind of cliched side characters. And normally this would be a big issue for me, like characters that are not interesting. But here, Edgar Wright's style, his editing, cinematography, action sequences, everything else in this film is fine-tuned to perfection, where it completely makes up for the lackluster characters and the sort of repetitive storytelling.
Neil, you were saying about she seems awesome?
Yeah, she seems awesome.
Yeah. Before you hear some dirty lies from someone else, yes, I'm dating a 17-year-old.
Oh, is he cute?
Ha ha ha.
Does this mean we have to stop sleeping together?
See another bed in here?
Oh yeah. You're totally my bitch forever.
Well, we're less than 10 minutes into this movie and we've met Scott's bandmates, his gay roommate, and now we get to meet his 17-year-old high school girlfriend, Knives Chow, who, as we see, interacts with Scott very well. They seem to be a very good couple for the most part. Knives and Scott sync up pretty perfectly in this game that they're playing, and they kind of have really nice back and forth conversations. They seem to be really connecting. But as the scene goes on, we kind of see that Scott is a horrible, selfish person who will eventually ruin this relationship between Knives.
You guys rock.
Well, I knew I personally rocked, but I never suspected that we rocked as a unit. So thank you, Knives.
I mean, you guys are gonna be huge.
Well, we're already pretty big, but yeah, I guess it'd be cool if cool people started wearing our t-shirt.
Despite Knives' clear obsession with Scott, Scott doesn't care about her. All that he wants from this relationship with her is for her to constantly stroke his ego, which she happily does because she's never seen some band member before. She's never dated a band member that really rocks before. And this relationship is very one-sided. Scott constantly is using Knives to make himself feel better about himself, and Knives, who is completely innocent to everything that's happening, kind of just goes along with it because she feels like he actually does love her when he clearly doesn't. They never do anything romantic. He just kind of takes her around to places that he knows in the hopes that she'll constantly be stroking his ego without him trying to do anything new or different.
Wow. Oh, God. So alone.
You're not alone.
What?
You're just having some idiotic dream.
Does that mean we can make out? Oh, God.
We see Scott have this vision of a girl skating in the desert. And then in the next cut, he goes to the library. We see her, the girl from the vision, at the library, and Scott decides that she is the one for him. So he goes to a party, he meets Ramona Flowers, who is the literal girl of his dreams, while simultaneously destroying his relationship with Knives and completely sidelining her for this new girl who he knows nothing about. It's this dynamic between Scott, Ramona, and Knives that is at the heart of this movie. It's this love triangle that a lot of these movies have that's at the heart of this movie. We see what kind of person Scott is. He's a manipulative, very self-centered person that takes advantage of Knives without her really knowing it, and then dumping her and moving on to Ramona Flowers, who's this mysterious hipster person that doesn't care what Scott thinks about himself or her, and that's very alluring to him, to have somebody that isn't constantly stroking his ego. And in the end, that's the overall message of the film. To have a relationship where you both respect yourselves and each other equally. The relationship between Knives and Scott was incredibly one-sided, as evident in the first 10 minutes of the movie.
I'll take out your junk and I'll crush it down. Mr. Pilgrim! It is I, Matthew Patel.
reconsider our fight? Begone!
What did I do? What do I do?
Fight! All right.
Watch out! It's that one guy.
But this is really where the meat of the story comes in, where Scott has to fight Ramona's 7 evil exes. If you ever thought that this wasn't a video game movie, this is the point where you should reconsider that, because the rest of the movie is literally just Scott going through levels and fighting 7 bosses at the very end of the levels. All 7 evil exes. So this is essentially just a video game, despite the plot being amazingly repetitive, where he's just basically doing the same things over and over again until the movie's over. It finds a unique and creative way to tell its story. He has to fight these 7 evil exes, and each one is different. Each one stands out. We have the first evil ex, who's this Indian magician man. The second is Chris Evans playing a action superstar. The third is a vegan, Brandon Routh, or Ruth, or however you say his name. The fourth is some goth chick with supernatural powers. The fifth and sixth, some Chinese twins. And the seventh is Jason Schwartzman, who is a music producer. And each of these boss fights, each of these fight sequences is unique and creative and different from the last. Each one has their own kind of gimmick, and it makes it way more interesting to watch than if it was just him fighting another person, like fist fights or with a sword or something. Each one has a gimmick to make it more interesting. But after Scott defeats the first evil ex, we get a scene where Scott and Ramona are on a bus together talking about their relationship.
I guess if we're gonna date, you may have to defeat my 7 evil exes.
You have 7 evil ex-boyfriends?
7 evil exes, yes.
And I have to fight, defeat your 7 evil exes if we're going to continue to date?
Pretty much.
So what you're saying right now is we are dating?
I guess.
Does that mean we can make out?
Sure.
Cool.
And this is a scene that really showcases what I love about Edgar Wright. He is a man of detail, and he pays attention to every little minute detail in his movies, and it shows. He puts so much purpose and meaning into every tiny little thing. It shows in this scene that having a passionate filmmaker behind the camera can make all the difference in the world. If you pay attention to the scene, behind Ramona Flowers you can see a bunch of X's in the background, kind of blurred out of focus. And this really helps you to get inside her head, to show what she's thinking. She's not thinking about Scott or the relationship. She's thinking about the League of Evil Exes, and it's worrying her. And the background of this, just the background, sort of helps you to get a gauge on where she is mentally. Whereas behind Scott, you can see in the background that it's little hearts all over, blurred in the background, which gives you a nice little indication of what he's thinking about. He doesn't care about the fight that just happened. He doesn't care about any of his friends. He cares about Ramona, and he's in love with Ramona. And in the background, it shows that. And then there's a little sound effect that indicates a switch up in Ramona's brain when Scott says, "So are we dating?" And then there's little hearts in the background behind her all of a sudden, which means that she's no longer thinking about that. Scott triggered something in her brain that suddenly made her think about him and their relationship. And it's just these tiny little details, these tiny little editing decisions that make all the difference in the world. They completely change a movie's feel and presentation. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World has so much more going on underneath, or so much more going on if you pay attention, and that's what I love about this movie. Another fun little detail about this movie is that before every evil X fight, there will be X's, foreshadowing that a fight is coming soon, and then right before the fight you see a number, the number of the evil X he's about to fight. So it's just these little details that make watching and rewatching Scott Pilgrim vs. the World a lot more fun.
Why wouldn't you be?
Wow. Wow.
Wow. He totally bailed. So now we're about 45 minutes into the movie and we see the second Evil X get blowed up, and we're so far into this movie and I have yet to talk about the driving force behind the movie, why it's so good in my opinion, and that's the comedy. Unlike a movie like Baywatch where the comedy is the biggest downfall, the comedy in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is its biggest, best attribute. When you're making a comedy film, there are so many ways you can make your audience laugh. The most well-known route that most films take is just verbal comedy, where characters just bounce off each other and tell jokes to each other. So verbal comedy, where they're just saying the joke. And in the cases of most of these movies, a lot of that is improvised, which is not inherently a bad thing, but when you actually have to write jokes into your movie and incorporate them into scenes, that's a lot harder. And that's what Scott Pilgrim does. Scott Pilgrim uses the medium of film to its utmost potential. He uses clever editing,
Like 6 in the morning.
lighting cues,
Even if you haven't had a real girlfriend in over a year.
Hey.
sound effects,
That time you dumped Kim.
Okay, me and Kim are all good now, all right?
music stings,
And roll sound.
camera movements, and visual gags.
You know this one girl with hair like this?
Yes, that's Ramona Flowers.
Without this amazingly sharp comedy propelling the movie forward, this could have very well been a middle-of-the-road movie, because it doesn't necessarily do anything that we haven't seen before. But Edgar Wright's usage of all these different aspects of film to make you laugh or to make a fun scene, everything works better because of this.
Hey,
Hey, Scott.
Envy?
Oh, shit.
Been a while.
Yeah,
A year, I think.
approximately.
How are you?
I'm not doing so good right now.
Oh, that's too bad. Still breaking hearts?
What? No, it's been different. You have no idea.
Probably not. Do you have a girlfriend? Should I be jealous?
Yes, you should. I have this totally awesome girlfriend who calls me all the time, and she's American.
What's her name?
I'm not telling you that. Ramona.
Oh.
What, do you know her?
What? No.
Oh, it sounded like you did.
I gotta go. It's been nice chatting with you.
Wait.
So anyway, we learn that Scott's ex, Brie Larson, is coming into town with her new boyfriend, who evidently was Ramona Flowers' old boyfriend, so he has to fight him and blow him up.
You once were a vegan, but now you will be gone.
Vegan.
Now this is a good time to talk about the cast. Remember when I talked earlier about the all-star cast? Rewatching this movie really hits home how all-star it really is. In today's standards, this is one of the best cast lists I've ever seen. You got Michael Cera, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Chris Evans, Brie Larson, Anna Kendrick, Aubrey Plaza, Brandon Routh, or Ruth, or however you pronounce that, and even Bill Hader as the voice that's constantly in the movie. Obviously, most of these actors haven't had their big break yet before this movie, but they're so great in this movie, and it's so nice to watch these big actors in these small supporting roles and having a real blast playing every character that they play. And without them, this movie could have slipped into mediocrity. It's just another thing that Edgar Wright has done so perfectly that without it, it could have been a completely different movie. They're all cast perfectly, and they all fit their characters so well, and they actually seem like they're really enjoying their character and being on set. Anyhow, we see that Scott kills these two Asian dudes. He has a nice little character arc where he learns that being honest is better than beating around the bush. He wins over Ramona Flowers by killing the seventh evil ex, Jason Schwartzman, or however you pronounce his name, and then he wins her over, and they walk off into the sunset or into a doorway. And that's the movie. Needless to say, I love this movie. It's excellent. But I could see why it's not for everybody. It's got weird, indie heavy rock music, strange editing techniques, barely any story, and the characters aren't exactly that compelling. Everything on paper about this movie should be not great. This movie should be middle of the road. But because it executes everything to perfection, it's better than it should be. The style, the performances, the action sequences, and the direction from Edgar Wright propel this movie forward into being one of the greatest video game adaptations in film history. This is one of my favorite video game comic book movies out there. Not much compares to it these days, to be honest. And it's really disappointing that Edgar Wright didn't get Ant-Man, because I feel like that could have been another one of these, another great, fun action movie. But as it stands, we got Baby Driver instead, and that's pretty great. So, anyway, I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.